Should brands stay out of politics? With us to discuss this, we have David Austin, senior planner at Iris Worldwide, responsible for brand and comm strategy on Britvic and Domino's Pizza. And in previous roles, David has led strategy for the likes of The Sun and Ford. And outside of the office, he is a co-founder of real-time hospitality recruitment app Pocketwork. We have Daniel Korski, CBE, former special advisor to David Cameron. Everyone remember him? And deputy director of the number 10 policy unit, passionate supporter of the EU, and campaigner for Remain. We have Chris Gorrell-Barnes, digital entrepreneur and marine conservationist, best known as the exec producer of the award-winning documentary The End of the Line, a film that changed attitudes towards seafood, including with companies such as Pret A Manger and Marks & Spencer. He founded digital agency at Ericsson in Milan. Throughout his career, he's worked with brands including Coke, MasterCard, Armani, and 3M. So welcome to you all. Thank you for being here. So we've had a tumultuous year, which has polarized, well, everyone in the US, over here, across Europe. So can brands please everyone anymore? And should they even try? Is it a case that, as Patagonia say, you should be pissing 50% of the people off? Start with you, Lorenzo.
No, I think nobody wants really to be pleased. I don't want personally to be pleased, and I guess you don't really want to be pleased. It's the wrong word. It's not very interesting to be pleased. So, no, they shouldn't even try. They should take position. But I think sometimes when we say they should stand for something, they should have very clear what they stand for. So when you started and said purpose, so every brand has a purpose. So if you just stand for something for the sake of it, it's not really relevant. But if you have a clear purpose as a brand and you listen to what people are telling you, and you have the action that makes it real in the short run, in the long run, then people will follow. So, you can say something, but if you don't believe in what you're saying, people are not really interested. So that's the narrative that brands have the opportunity to set.
I think that's a good point, and probably makes a lot of sense for certain brands who have a bolder message built in. For something like an FMCG brand, for like what we saw with Ariel, I was going to say, what about a soap powder? But we saw with Ariel that they were cause-driven too. But I'd like your thoughts on, is this possible for every brand? Can every brand have a purpose?
Yes. Yes, I think they should. And there are very, very interesting examples. Recently, we've seen Like a Girl from Always. So you wouldn't expect a brand like that to come with such an interesting story. So it's not about voting Trump or not. It's not about taking a position everywhere. It's about taking a position where it matters to what you're saying. You're giving a product, so you're giving a benefit to someone. So in that sense, you want to have something that goes beyond a single solution. So you want to support the benefit, and that is a purpose. The reason why you have a product or a service is the purpose. So then, and that helps you out in expanding your offer in the long term, as we have seen in many other brands. So there are plenty of cases. Have you seen in Opt Outside or Like a Girl? We've seen many. So I think it's really not an option.
Who else wants to chime in there?
Yeah, I think it goes beyond just a purpose. So you have your purpose, but you also need your brand character. So you might have a position on something, you might have a way you want to talk about something, or you might even have a stance, but it all comes down to your brand character and how you want to actually engage in that topic. So, for example, Nando's in South Africa. Nando's in South Africa is a great example of pissing 100% of people off. But what's great about it is because they don't pick certain sides, and because they piss everyone off, basically in South Africa, if you're not aware, they do reactive press ads near enough to every news topic and every piece of political news that happens. And they are essentially taking a satirical approach to everyone. And the point is they can get away with that because of their brand character. They've built up a brand character that allows them to be cheeky, that allows them to push their tone and allows them to get away with those sorts of campaigns.
Do you think that sort of strategy will still work now when, you know, there are divisive different groups of consumers built around, you know, coalescing around these polarizing issues of Brexit, of Trump? Can a brand be cheeky still without risking, you know, some sort of comeback?
But it depends whether you're considering the comeback as a negative. So yes, you might piss off 48% of people, but you've just improved the relationship you have with 52% of people. So it all comes down to what are you trying to achieve and who's your audience. And as long as it fits with your audience and your brand strategy, then you're doing the right thing. Okay,
this is a point I want to come back to because we discussed this idea of Brexit brands. But Daniel, from your perspective, you know, you were in the thick of a campaign which polarized the entire country. Do you think that there is any way for brands to reach everyone now, or should they not bother?
Well, I mean, it strikes me that politicians of all hues are more aware now than ever before that they are not as trusted as they used to be. And so they need to go out and validate themselves or become validated in various different ways. And one of the ways that politicians have found most useful in doing so is to align themselves with various different corporate validators, whether that is, you know, the large FTSE 100s that vouch for a politician's economic sense, or it is a cool brand that allows them to speak to an audience that would normally not tune in to a politician. So I think we've got to start from the assumption that going forward, the more discredited that the political profession is, the more it'll seek to gain validation through various different kind of partnerships, or what we've also seen in the course of the Brexit campaign, and I think in the Trump campaign, not do what you said, which is think of yourself as a news organization, but actually think of yourself as an insurgency, deliberately against everything. So I think we're going to see a lot of that. And when I think a bit about my experience speaking to FTSE 100 CEOs and chairmen and women, trying to persuade them to support, you know, whatever statement or a policy pronouncement, whether in the course of the EU campaign or prior to that, the thing that strikes me that I just wanted to add to what you guys have touched on, the thing that strikes me that makes the difference between people wanting to be bold, provocative, potentially divisive, isn't just, is it within brand, is it within character, but also partly, is this a listed company? Who actually owns the stock? How sensitive are they to large institutional investors and some of the concerns that they have, some other aspects?
Yeah, and on that note, I think this depends on whether your brand purpose is something that is purely for consumers' benefit and for marcoms, or whether it is a brand purpose that you believe in and all buy into on an internal level. So, for example, it may be one thing to be acting as a brand in positive ways towards a particular topic, but if you're then lobbying behind the scenes against it, it kind of comes at odds with each other. So I think it's an absolutely valid point. I think a lot of brands have a brand purpose that is purely marcoms, whereas in fact a brand purpose and a passionate purpose is there to inform everything you do as a company, from new product development to the way you deal with investors, the way you deal with the city, and the way you speak to your customers.
So Chris, I guess you have great experience of this in terms of actually changing the way brands operate at ground level with the end of the line campaign. I mean, having changed minds in that way, did you see that coming back to you from the brands in the way that they wanted to then change minds in their consumers?
I think that, I mean, just to your point, I think in this day and age with the need for authenticity, transparency, the headwinds in advertising, that if a brand isn't authentic to the core, then it's not going to survive. So a purpose can't be, you know, an old CSR label just stuck on the front of your corporate report. It needs to be absolutely the one thing, the North Star that the CEO is driving, and that everybody from the people on the shop floor to people in the marketing department to how the product's made to how it's supplied absolutely is aligned to the purpose. Otherwise, I don't believe if a brand has a purpose and that purpose is going to have a positive social impact on the world, that brand will survive. So to your point, I think very, very strongly that no planet, no profit, right? If we don't have a healthy planet, then brands are not going to be able to make any money. And in terms of the most important thing on the political agenda right now, in my opinion, is the environment, right? We've got these terrifying political headwinds with Donald Trump's opinion on climate change, that this is something made up by the Chinese to start dampening US industry. You know, Theresa May is not really driving the environmental agenda. And if brands don't take a stance on that, I think we're going to be in real trouble. And we're starting to see some encouraging, great strides from Paul Pullman, Unilever. You know, he's really, really pushing this. He's doing a brilliant job with the Sustainable Development Goals. It's a business that he believes, you know, if they don't have brands with a purpose that are really driving sustainability, that we won't have a planet, we won't be able to cure the issues. So, in my own experience, I've managed to use working with brands to help protect some of the largest areas of the ocean. We've worked with Marks and Spencer's, with Waitrose, the end of the line, LVMH, where they've really put their communications budgets, their power behind the issue of overfishing. We've had Kenzo, which is LVMH's baby, have its whole fashion show globally with no fish, no nothing, and dead fish on the runway in Paris to promote the fact that if we don't have a healthy ocean, we're not going to have a planet. Waitrose actively promoted overfishing, even though fish is one of their biggest food products to sell. And they sponsored my film, they promoted it to all of their customers, and it resulted in an increase in sales of sustainable fish. So you get behind a cause, it can actually lead to a profit.
Can I just ask a question? Sorry to be a bit cheeky. I feel a bit like the outsider on this panel, not hailing from the advertising industry. And just listening to the three of you speak, I can't help but think that, of course, if you sit three advertising specialists on a panel and ask them if they think advertising is important and brand is important, they're going to say, yes, it absolutely is. But what do we do about the fact, and I came across this all the time when trying to persuade people, that there are lots of very successful large corporations who do not believe this. You know, Lockheed Martin does not think that it needs to be within brand or have a mission, except maybe to provide, you know, weaponry that kills very accurately. Oh. And people are very happy to buy that stuff. And so I
think there is an assumption, which is a wrong assumption, which is a purpose is a good planned thing. It's not. I mean, you think you have three banks, and you have, we have the equal banks, so we give money and we care about people. Then you have the fast bank, you know, all digital. And then you have the evil bank, which is like, we are evil, we don't care, we're just good in making money. It's like, they're very clear positioning, and it's up to you to decide. And it's quite clear that if you go with the evil bank, you get very good money because they get very risky, they don't really care about anything, they are consistent in what they say. They might not even put that out loud, because if you are the evil bank, you want to keep quiet, and that might be very successful as well. So I think sometimes when you say purpose, we tend to say we need to have a great, nice, funny, incredibly powerful purpose, but that's not necessarily the case. There are plenty of successful companies with a very clear purpose, and people buy that. And the fact that that is somehow, if you make that clear, it's very easy to buy. And part of that is the honesty of Trump has beaten some less clear purpose from the other side. He has very clear idea in mind. People buy that, and people buy the fact he believes in those. So if we say it's wrong or right, doesn't really care. I mean, people believe in that, and we have to respect that. So I think the advertising assumption that, you know, all that beautiful world behind the purpose, that is what you're referring. That's wrong, but still, the fact of having one still remains true to me.
Yeah, I think it's a key point, probably the key point. And to your point about Trump, I want to ask you all about this idea of misinformation. You know, this fake news theme is big at the moment, but more specifically, this idea that yes, Trump's message cut through in a way that Clinton's didn't, but it was a message to a certain extent, built on misinformation, and how, as both brand experts and communicators in any form, how do you exist, in that world where perhaps your truthful, authentic message is drowned out?
Live in it. So for them, that was not a misinformation. And I would be very interested to know now, what do they think? They might change their mind in the time. But yes, I think we need to be a little more cautious about what the true information is and what is not. What is very true is that facts don't matter that much. So yes, like when you have come in front of a fact, the discussion goes to some other facts, and then sometimes they don't talk to each other. And I have a great experience of that because, I come from Italy. We have 20 years of Berlusconi. So, I know what I'm talking about. And there is a very powerful line from somebody saying, he believes in his own lies. So that guys will tell lots of lies and believe in it, and people will still believe in it after years and years and years. And the problem Trump had with girls, Berlusconi had it in another league of level, and still people are buying that and voting it. So I think we need to be careful. I think the fact what and how brands or purpose can be good in this is trying to have good narratives. So, and being consistent across time. I think we shouldn't rely on facts that are untrue versus facts that are not. This is kind of a little...
So, Daniel, I imagine you have a point to make here. In fact, do facts matter?
Well, I think facts matter, and I think that if you are, like me, a believer in an open, liberal, empirically grounded society, you should fight hard for the facts to continue to matter. But I do acknowledge the fact that, of course, your preconceived notions color how you see reality. We know for a fact that when people are asked in U.S. Politics whether or not there was a recession under a previous president, their view on whether there was a recession or not is colored almost entirely by whether they supported that president or not. So they're willing to believe certain facts. But I do think that discourses are different in different political contexts. And I think that and there's a tendency now, particularly at conferences like this and amongst jet-setting liberal elites like us, to think of it all as one big melee, one debate. The debate that they have in the States is sort of the debate that is also going on here. But it isn't. We do value veracity in a different way in the British political discourse, and we have, of course, seen that isn't perfect, and both sides of the political campaign during the referendum chose to emphasize certain things and overemphasize others. But on the whole, I think it isn't true to say facts don't matter. I think they do matter in certain political contexts more so than others. But I also don't think that Trump won because he lied. I think we have to be careful about that. And he didn't win because exclusively because of a brilliant Facebook strategy that suppressed certain pieces of information and suppressed voter turnout in certain groups. I think we have to be a bit careful about that. I think one of the reasons why he won was because he had a very clear set of messages. And I remember traveling around in the States, and you can go almost into any diner and ask people, what does Donald Trump stand for? And they'd be saying, make America great, build a wall, and stop those Muslims coming in, right? You may not like any of those messages, but in terms of message penetration, which is what politicos like I worry about, he got it. And you could have asked the same people, what does Hillary Clinton stand for? And quite often people would say things to you, I found, that Hillary Clinton stood for that Trump had been trying to persuade you to believe what she stood for. They would say, Benghazi, email scandal, and so on. And none of her positive messages came through, partly because I don't think she had some clear messages. It was all about her, I'm with her, not about what she wanted to do. So I think we should have to be a bit careful to reduce the current conversation about reality and fake news into a sort of judgment about whether that was why Trump won or not.
I think there's also a point with, whilst one of the things we need to do is we need to learn from what people have voted for. So I think it's really easy, particularly in London, particularly in the ad industry where everyone's very liberal-minded and most likely left-leaning. I think what needs to be remembered is what the population or 52% in the UK or likewise in America, what they have voted for. They have bought into an emotional message of let's make America great again, but they're also showing that they are scared about immigration. They're also showing that they are worried about their personal finances. They're worried about their personal prosperity. They're worried about lots of issues. And I think it's really easy to say that, yes, we've got to get behind the things that matter, i.e. global warming and whatever else. But as a brand, if your customers and if your consumers aren't those people, and they're the people that don't care, and they're the 52% of people that actually are more worried about themselves and more worried about their own agenda and more worried about those sorts of things, then actually, is there going to be a brand that stands for them and stands for the sorts of messages that they want?
Which is the major problem, is people are inherently selfish, and they care about themselves and they care about their local community. They don't give a shit about the wider world. They don't give a shit about beyond their city or their country, and that's the problem with global warming, is people just don't care.
I think that's quite unfair. It's quite. We are all selfish. I'm selfish, and you are selfish as well. And we are here talking in a selfish way, so everybody can be selfish. And I think it's quite easy to get into that way. And that's where the discussion gets a little like, oh, you vote this because you're selfish, and I voted this other way because I'm not selfish. And I think this is a kind of a view that is exactly wrong, because it's kind of easy to get to an enemy and to define some differences in terms of that sort of soft barriers, but that's not really helping to define. So that's the kind of thing that I can disagree or agree with you. It's just going to be another opinion. And the politics has a lot about this discussion, and the brands need to be careful not to get into that one, because when you have a clear purpose, I like what you said before. You said, oh, planet is not an opinion. It's getting worse. We need to care about that. That's a fact. That's true. There's no way to deny it. And if you deny it, you are lying. So that's something very important to stick on. But if we go and say, I'm caring about this, so I'm generous, you're not, you're selfish, that's where the fact discussion get into
customers and consumers that are from mixed bases. Essentially, the world isn't our Facebook feed, filled with people pissed off about Brexit and filled with people pissed off about Trump. There's actually a load of people out there who are happy about this, and a load of people that see this as positivity. So I guess the question is that we have lots of brands that are standing up for liberal causes, which is brilliant, but are there going to be any brands, and I've mentioned this previously, is there going to be a Brexit brand? Is there going to be a brand that's going to jump on this wave?
So just to jump in, and I thought, in fact, you were going to say the point is to make lots of people who don't think these global issues matter to them, make them realize that they do matter to them. So rather than say the 52% don't care about something, rather to make them care in a way that is brand promoting. And to your point, I think there are Brexit brands. J.D. Wetherspoon is a business run by a very pro-Brexit businessman who I think both passionately believes in Brexit, but I think also had an eye to his customer base and is very happy about that. Slightly differently, you have Dyson, where I think the brand is not. I don't think his customers are particularly pro-Brexit or pro-Remain, but he is certainly. James Dyson is very pro-Brexit, and so there's another example where he has. I don't think he's turned Dyson into a Brexit brand in the way that J.D. Wetherspoon has, but he's positioned himself quite clearly. The reason why I mention those two is because I can sort of see people nodding when I said J.D. Wetherspoon. Yes, of course, they're the kind of people who would support Brexit. They're standing down at the pubs at 12 o'clock and having a pint for £2.50 with the chips. But Dyson is the example of a different kind of market that still feels comfortable, promoting that message.
So yeah, that idea of a different kind of market, I think, is really interesting. This is one of the things we talk about a lot on Stylus, which is that people are more and more divided by their values and their beliefs than they are by their location, their age, their gender, from a marketing perspective. So I'm interested in this idea of what new markets are. Are we seeing these new markets? Are they long-lasting markets? Is this Brexit aftermath going to be a permanent feature of the British consumer landscape, do you think?
I would say, I think, on verra. We'll see if the government fails to deliver an outcome that produces a prosperous future for the UK, then yes, this will be a cleavage which was going to reverberate, down the generations, because people will want to continue that kind of political discussion. If, on the other hand, I think they were to craft an outcome and a negotiation which, over a 2-year period and potentially a 5-year transitional period, leads to a positive economic outcome, then I think there's a greater chance that the cleavage will be, in my view, lessened. That would be my take.
So I just want to go back to your point about message penetration, because obviously with the Brexit campaign we saw a few rejected adverts that the Remain campaign were going to use, and there was perhaps a slight failure in getting across the Remain idea. And I just wonder, from your perspective as a campaigner and from your perspective as brand communicators, what can politics learn from brands to spin this question around? What is it that is important now in terms when it comes to message penetration?
I think that Brexit. I think that the Remain camp, their biggest mistake was focusing on W1, and to your point about people in this room thinking that that's really what's going on in the country. If you were to ask Steve Rowe, who's the CEO of Marks and Spencer's, he bet on Brexit because he's going the length of the country to where people to really have a completely different opinion to W1. And I think politics is too focused on what's going on in W1.
Is advertising not?
I think it is.
Yeah, so they both have the same problem. Right.
Yeah, advertising's far too obsessed with millennials. If I hear that word again, I may scream. It's insane, particularly when you look at the spending power of the over 50s and then translate that into voting as well, the voting power of the over 50s. It far outweighs millennials, yet the conversation is constantly on the liberal-minded views of millennials and not the traditionalist views of, say, the over 50s. So I think both brands and brands can learn from politics, but politics can also learn from brands in that sense that we need to step away, take a trip up to Hull, take a trip up to Birmingham, meet some real people in a pub, and don't just assume they're all trendy people in Shoreditch.
I mean, I like to think they're real people in London too, but I take your point. I'd answer it like this. I think there are a series of technical methods that politics has learned from branding over the last, in particular, 10 years, probably since time immemorial, but in particular the last 10 years. How to use channels, how to target, particularly on social and media and through digital, channels. So I think there's a sort of technical process where we have now reached, even over the last 10 years, a point where it feels to me that you can get as savvy a digital marketeer on the political side as you can on the commercial side, which I don't think it was the case 10 years ago. I think then there's a question of, agility and flexibility. And what I'm struck by, sort of on the political side, is the extent to which you guys are able to act incredibly fast and smartly, and you can innovate in various different ways, create new partnerships, conjure up new campaigns, change them a bit. And that is really something politics still sort of struggles to do as nimbly. And when it's...
I think the sophistication of Obama's campaign was, a sort of guiding light to so many brands in terms of actually how they turned around social media, how they used digital. I mean, it's always...
hope, me, change, that was it. And what I'm trying to say is, I totally agree with you on that level, and that's what I'm saying. I think we've now reached a level where politics is as good as sort of, advertising at the technical level. But one level, if you will, up, you know, I still think politics struggles to be as innovative, not at the technical, but in terms of the partnerships that they develop, the issues that they pick up, the way that they speak to people in different ways that make people go, oh, I mean, your example, fish on the catwalk, brilliant, right? Suddenly, you know, lots of people tuning in to see this nice show, and wow, in their faces was this issue that they didn't think they were going to have to think about at that moment, and that shock value was what sort of, I presume, you know, drove the moment. Politics, you know, on the whole, isn't so good at that. And the people who are the best at that, the Nigel Farages and the Donald Trumps, you know, have succeeded recently because they're able to produce those shock moments, a different way of thinking about politics that drives the news cycle, et cetera, et cetera.
I think there is an interesting thing beyond technology and the tactics, which is that you can see around. At the end, Brexit was a big fat no to something. You know, it was a campaign with an enemy, and Trump has clear enemies as well. So, you know, it's like when you don't have a clear purpose, then you can find your big enemy, and it's very effective. In Italy, we just had another one. It was another big fat no to government, and a lot of people say no. And that's easier to find people around you to say no to the status quo. So now the fact is, how do you build a narrative on some yes? And that's what Obama did, in a way. And it was very simple, but simplicity is a sort of a ultimate sophistication. So when you have that narrative that starts from a very credible point and then goes down, and there is where the tactics comes all together and people follow. So, you know, we say that Martin Luther King didn't have a plan. He had a dream. And so you can have a dream, you can have an enemy, you can have a cause, but you need to have it very, very simple, and things comes together quite easily. And then you need to have actions that makes it true in the long run. You can see now, like, what are the actions now? Difficult to say in different parts of the world, but I think the challenge as a brand or as a politic in a way might be similar to what's your yes proposition. So I'm not against something which is that easy and gives you the awareness or the power penetration, but then how do you build that in the mid run?
Just to quickly say, I just would say, I think that is exactly what the problem for the 48% are now. How do they define, I mean, not everybody in the 48 agree, but on the whole, how do you, if you are an open-minded liberal person who voted for Hillary Clinton, or if you voted for Remain, you know, how do you conjure up the things that you stand for in an easy, simplistic, sellable proposition?
That's your job for today, everyone. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. I'd love to keep talking about this. It's a really vital and complex issue. Thank you all, Lorenzo, David, Daniel, Chris. It was really fantastic discussion, and thanks for listening.